opportunity to look and this time around, we're going to have the opportunity to look into a typical example of a traumatic experience, and there will be opportunity for us to ask questions. So please, if you have any question at all for me, I'll be more than happy to take in all your questions. So just go easy on me anyway. Okay, so because of the nature of this conversation, we're going to be talking a lot about trauma, and the word trauma itself can be triggering for some people. So please, if at any point during our conversation you feel a bit overwhelmed or you feel like it's getting too distressing, you can take a stop and just maybe take a short break and join back. Always remember that your mental health and your well-being comes first. But I will always encourage that try as much as possible to participate because it's going to be an interactive session. I'm not just going to come and talk, talk, talk. It's going to be a much interactive session where we're both going to exchange our ideas and learn together. However, your participation is voluntary. So please do feel free to join in the activity. So before we start, I have a warm-up activity for us. It is anonymous, so you don't have to worry about your name being displayed or any personal information. So it's a question. So I'm going to share the link and the chat, and you just tell us what is one thing you do to feel better during stressful times. You might have more than one ideas. It's welcome, but just a minute. I'm going to share the link now. I'm trying to get on the chat. Okay, so it's in the chat box. So just type in one answer. I'm going to display our responses. Let us see how many beautiful ideas we have in the room. So just share one. What is one thing you do when you feel stressed? Let me go. Okay. So let's see our responses. Oh my God, I have so many things all over the place here. Okay. So we have to, oh my God. So from we can see, let me just launch the, okay. So if you can see, I hope you can all see what I'm displaying on the screen right now. I'm trying to, okay. So from our responses so far, the major one we have here is take a walk. So we can see some of us take a walk when we are stressed, some sleep, some listen to music. Oh, music. So what this is called, this is a word cloud, and it's a visual representation of the things of our ideas during meetings like this. So from what we can see from the picture that is displayed now is a live response. And I can see that majority of us in the group, in the room right now, we enjoy music and we find music very helpful during stressful times. Other responses, we can still listen to music, eat, okay, painting, cry, sleep, take a walk. Okay, let's give others about 1 minute to write. So thank you very much for sharing. So it's just for us to have an idea of, because sometimes when we are going through certain things in life, we feel like we are the only ones going through. But trust me, in nowadays, there's a lot going in the world in general, and it's very important for us to know how we are able to detox and how we are able to relieve ourselves from the stress. So thank you. So we can say that music, sleep, walk, watching movie, eating, and painting are one of the common examples people said on this group regarding how you are able to deal with stressful times. During our conversation, we are going to see more examples of how we can help ourselves when we feel stressed. Let me just, I, okay. Okay. So let's talk about what is trauma itself. I mean, we've been talking a lot about trauma, trauma, trauma. What does trauma mean? So I'm not going to bore us with technical definitions of what is trauma, but in a very simple term, trauma is an emotional response to a deeply distressing or life-threatening event. The two keywords there are stress, distressing, and life-threatening, and it could range from natural disaster to flood to war to being involved in an accident, abuse, violence, and so many other negative life experiences. So before an individual can be diagnosed with trauma, it means that person must have experienced a distressing or life-threatening event. And what trauma does is that it could have an immediate response or a lifelong effect on our well-being. So if you look at immediate responses, some of the very common immediate responses to trauma is fear and anxiety. I'll use myself as an example. So when I was about six, I think 7 year old, we had this neighbor that had this very fierce looking dog. Only God knows where he bought that dog from. So on this fateful day, I was with my younger brother. I was carrying my younger brother and I went out of the compound. And this dog came out of nowhere and began to chase me. I ran for my dear life. In fact, at some point, I didn't even know when the dog stopped chasing me. Maybe someone chased it for me. I don't have, I can't even remember, but I remember that experience. And up to date, I tell you that whenever I see dog, sometimes I still have that flashback of how I felt, how I was scared. And to date, I'm not even sure if I want to have a dog as a pet because I'm always scared whenever I see dog. That is just a mild example of trauma. For some people, it could be severe. It could be in terms of um, abuse. That's another example of trauma. So what happens when people experience trauma? They begin to have fear, anxiety. Some may begin to feel helpless about life. They feel like there's nobody to help me. Sometimes it could also lead to physiological changes like rapid heartbeats and sweating, shaking, stomach ache, and so many other immediate reactions. And the sad part is that when if trauma is left unaddressed, especially severe trauma cases, it can lead to long term mental health issues. And a very common example is what we call the PTSD. For those of us who do not know what PTSD means, is post traumatic stress disorder. From the word post traumatic. It means that it happens after a traumatic event has occurred and it's a mental health condition. So one of the symptoms is that people begin to have like nightmare, begin to have flashbacks. We say the person has PTSD, and there are some other criteria that you check out for. Another sad effects of trauma is depression. People who experience trauma can become depressed. Sometimes they begin to go into substance abuse, anything to distract them from addressing the trauma itself. So we can see that trauma can have both immediate effects on ourselves and long-term effects, which we are going to look in detail as I move on. So when we talk about trauma itself, trauma can happen in stages. In medical world, we call it when we say acute trauma. What it means is that that person has experienced trauma once, one event. So, example, if an individual was involved in a car accident, or was involved in a flood, or was involved in fight that was severe, in that case, we'd say it's acute because it's a single event. However, when an individual is experiencing trauma for a prolonged period of time, we'd say it's chronic trauma. That means it is repeated. And a common example is child abuse. Imagine a child that is living in an environment where both parents are constantly fighting. They don't have time for that child. And then this child now begins to maybe have to go out to seek love. Sometimes the child is neglected by the parents and the family. That is an example of a chronic trauma because it's an ongoing event for a period of time. And the okapatapata of trauma is what we call complex trauma. This is when an individual experiences multiple. Imagine one person experiencing more than one traumatic event, and we say that person is experiencing a complex trauma. So this is just a classification we use to identify whether a person has acute trauma or chronic trauma or complex trauma. Please, if you have any question, please put them down. I'll be happy to answer so that I don't bore you with so many terminologies and so on. So these are just common examples of trauma that we can see in our day-to-day life activities. In Nigeria, for example, we hear a lot of cases about domestic violence. This is usually between partners, whether married, whether dating, and it can come in different forms. It could be involved in physical assault. Sometimes it may be verbal abuse, emotional abuse. They are all examples of domestic violence, and it's a traumatic experience. Some people uh, experience this traumatic experience and they're not even aware that what they are experiencing is a traumatic event. Another example is sexual abuse, conflicts, kidnap, so many other bad and sad events like the loss of loved ones, whether you lost your father, mother, family member that is very close to you. That's another example of trauma. Another very common example is poverty and hardship. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that everyone who do not have money is experiencing trauma. But what I'm saying is that sometimes poverty can lead to some events that can cause trauma. Imagine if a child that has not eaten for days, or people who are unable to live in an apartment, they have to live on the streets, they have to live on hams, they have to beg for money. That is a traumatic event on its own. So we can see that there are so many common causes of trauma that we can see in our day-to-day activities. Another one is bullying, whether at work, whether at school. We've seen so many cases of people that are being bullied. That is another example of traumatic event. So the list is long and we can start going into them one after the other. But we always know that we are all unique and everyone have unique experiences. So at some point in our lives, maybe we could be a friend, it could be ourselves. We might have experienced one or multiple of these examples. What it means is that we've gone through a traumatic experience. And so let us look at this case study together. So what I want us to do is that I want us to look into this and see if we are able to identify any stressful events at all that we can say that this lady has experienced a traumatic experience. So you can put it in the chat box if you are able to identify any traumatic events in the life of this person. I will go through it. So this person is called Miss A. We decide not to use name of anyone to maintain anonymity. So Miss A is a 30-year-old professional who grew up in a chaotic and abusive home. Her father was violent towards her mother. And anytime Miss A tried to attempt to intervene, say, Daddy, stop beating my mom, it often leads to her own physical and emotional harm. Her mother is battling with depression and unable to care for the family. And so what happens? Miss A is forced to take the role of the caregiver for her younger siblings at a young age. She carried her childhood scars into adulthood, struggling to trust others. So what this led to is the fact that Miss A in her relationships is either she's over clinging to the person or she's avoiding intimacy completely. So this is a typical example of a life experience of someone who has experienced multiple traumatic events. So let's see if we are able to identify any. So I'll go through the chart and see if we are able to identify any traumatic events this lady has gone through. I hope you all understand what I'm asking. So what I'm saying is that I want us to look at this case study and see if you are able to identify any area that we can say, oh, this is a traumatic experience based on the examples that we've looked on earlier. Oh, someone says, Olanike Ogunleye said violence. Yes, we can see a bit of violence there because our father was violent towards our mother. Thank you. Someone said, growing up, that is Oludare Odumuyiwa says, growing up in a chaotic and abusive home. Yes, that is another element of trauma. Let's see how much neglect. Yes, neglect, child neglect was also one of the issues this lady faced. Parental abandonment. Yes. So thank you, Hope. I can see you wrote parental abandonment. Yes. Do we have anyone else, or would anyone is willing to share with us? You can turn on the microphone and just say one or two things if you would like to share with us. Why do you think this person has experienced a traumatic experience? Hello. Oh, okay.
Can you hear me
Better.
now?
Yes, I can hear you. Please go ahead.
Good evening. Thank you so
Good
much for
evening.
joining us. We just going to say that I'm learning something. So
Okay.
from this
Mhm.
case study,
Yes.
the looking at how Miss A grew up, the fact that she grew up in a home where she constantly saw her father beat her mother, that's domestic violence. And so
Yes.
that's a trauma on its own, based on the
Okay.
explanation you've been giving us. So yeah,
Yes.
you could
Yes.
also see that the fact that she had to take up responsibility at such an early age. So that
Yes.
could also be.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. But you're an expert in this already. Thank you so much. Thank you. Anyone else would like to share with that? I need one more person to just put on the mic and tell us what is another, because she actually experienced multiple trauma. Okay, I can see Olanike says she was raised in a dysfunctional family. Yes, independency at a young age. Yes, you are all right. Thank you so much, everyone. So this is what I have highlighted. So the first traumatic experience is that she grew up in a chaotic and abusive home. No child deserves to live in such an environment. It's toxic for the child, and we say it's traumatic. The father was violent towards her mother. That is another chaotic experience and another traumatic experience. The fact that even when she tries to intervene, her father beats her and emotionally insults her. That is also another example of a traumatic experience. Children who grow up seeing their parents battle mental health conditions is also a traumatic experience for them. And at a very tender age, she was forced to take care of her younger ones. I mean, this child was deprived of childhood. A child should be allowed to go and play with their friends, enjoy your childhood. But instead, this child, Miss A, had to take care of her younger ones. And what this in turn, what it led to is the fact that she began to form unhealthy relationships because of the fear of abandonment. It's either she's too clingy to a partner or she just avoids intimacy entirely. So we can see how sometimes childhood experiences can have a long-term effect on ourselves during so even research has shown that people who experience childhood traumatic experiences, their tendency that it will follow them down into adulthood. So it's very important for us to be able to identify these traumatic experiences and seek help as early as possible. So now the main question, the reason why we are all here to talk about trauma is to see how do trauma affect us. So let's start from the brain itself. So when we look at this is a picture of what our brain looks like. I'm not going to bore us with terminologies, but there is something in our brain called the fear center. This is the part of our brain that, for example, when you're afraid, there's a part of our brain that is actually sending that signal into our body to let you know that you are scared. So what happens to someone what happens to the brain when we've experienced trauma is the fact that that part of the brain that controls fear begins to work round the clock, meaning that it becomes hyperactive. It's working whether you're sleeping, whether you're awake. That part of our brain is constantly working. So imagine the brain is constantly working that there is fear, there is fear, there is fear. Over time, it leads to a lot of emotional breakdown. So one of the major impacts on our brain is the fact that trauma makes it makes the body trigger a lot of response related to fear. Another one is what we call the hippocampus. This is the part of our brain that is responsible for our memory. The fact that you're able to remember what you ate this morning, there's a part of our brain that is responsible for that control. And what happens is that when people experience trauma, that part of that brain becomes very difficult to process traumatic events. That is why sometimes when you ask people to share their experiences, they find it very difficult to tell you explicitly what happened. Not because they deliberately want to hide that story from you, but because even the part of the brain is struggling to process what happened. And that is what trauma can have on our brain. Another one is what we call the prefrontal cortex. This is the part that regulates our emotions. Whether you're crying, you're sad, you're happy, there's a part of our brain that regulates that emotion. So when the brain is exposed to trauma, what happens is that that part of the brain that regulates our emotions becomes weak. So you can see that people who experience trauma, sometimes they can have outbursts of anger, to just be angry for no reason. Sometimes they can be so withdrawn. Sometimes they can be scared because it becomes very difficult for them to manage and regulate their emotions. Sometimes they can burst into tears. It is not their fault. It is because of that part of the brain has been affected by trauma. So this is what trauma can do in our brain. And then when we look at it more in terms of our emotional responses, one of the very common um, issues that arises when people are exposed to trauma is that they begin to have intense fear and anxiety. So it makes it very difficult for them to feel safe. A very common example is people who have experienced sexual violence. You find it very difficult for them to sleep alone at night. Some will tell you they can't sleep with the lights turned off because there is this constant. Remember, I said that the part of this brain, what we call the part of the brain called the fear center, is already triggered already. So by that time, they feel like people are coming from me. So there are some people that when you just touch them, they become very alert. Sometimes it may be because of they've had a traumatic experience. So it triggers a lot of anxiety and fear. And like I said, sometimes it can also trigger anger and irritability. They become very angry. They have this outburst of anger, overwhelming emotions. Sometimes it could be tears, just burst into tears. And no matter how much you try to console them, they just can't help themselves. Another time, which is very sad, is that sometimes people are filled with shame and guilt when they've experienced trauma. Most especially when it comes to sexual violence, you find many victims not wanting to come out to open up or to share their experiences because sometimes they blame themselves. They start asking themselves, what if I have not gone to visit this person, maybe it would have happened. Maybe if I had not dressed in this certain way, maybe this wouldn't have happened. Even though it wasn't their fault, but it's very difficult for them to accept the fact that it was not their fault. So that is another emotional response, that how trauma can affect our emotions. You begin to feel shame. Some will not even want others to know about what has happened because they feel like, oh, maybe people will laugh at me and make fun of me, so they keep it to themselves. These are the things trauma can do to our emotions. And sometimes people began to have what is called numbness, meaning that they want to disconnect themselves from the experience. So they don't want to talk about it, they don't want to remember it. And even if you ask any question at all, they just don't want to talk about it. It's a self protective mechanism for people, for many survivors, just to feel disconnected from their experience. But the truth is that it still does not change the fact that they had that experience. So even when we try to cover it up, not talk about it, it still doesn't change the fact that we've experienced it. So it's always encouraged that we open up and we talk about it so that way we can heal up that traumatic event. Despite the fact that trauma affects our brain, it affects our emotions, it also affects us physically. A common examples is constant headache. Even when this person uses paracetamol back to back, the person still experiencing migraines sometimes. Another very common example is sleep disturbances. You are unable to sleep at night. Some people begin to have nightmare. So what happened in the traumatic experience can begin to repeat in their dreams, and they begin to have constant nightmare. So when someone is having constant nightmare, of course, the person will not want to sleep anymore. So we begin to have sleep disturbances. Sometimes it's going to affect our digestive system, stomach ache, vomiting, headache. So we can see that trauma does not only affect our emotions, it does not only affect um, our behavior, it also affects even some part of our physical well-being as well, because there's always a link between our mental health and our physical health. I hope I'm not taking too much time. Okay, I'm looking at the time. So another way in which trauma can affect us is that it begins to affect our behaviors as well. And a very common way people react to trauma is avoidance. So people want to avoid that specific event that happened. I give an example. Imagine someone who was driving and was involved in an accident. That is a traumatic experience. And sometimes that individual might find it difficult to want to drive again because you don't want to get yourself in that position where you are remembering what led to that trauma. Sometimes it could be maybe someone has been violent to a child. The child wants to avoid that individual. Whenever that child sees that person, begins to panic and shake because he wants to avoid. So that is one of the behavioral changes that may occur when someone has experienced trauma. Another one is self-destructive behavior. You see, you have some people say that because they want to distract themselves from the trauma that they are going to, then they begin to cut themselves and do so many self-harm just to divert those emotional pain into physical pain. And it's called self-harm. Some go into substance abuse and so many other risky behaviors just because they want to get over that traumatic experience. And sometimes it could be social withdrawal. You don't want to go out, you don't want to go out with friends, you don't want to communicate with anybody at all. They begin to isolate themselves. That is not, and most time we find it in extreme cases. People who have experienced extreme trauma, they want to be withdrawn from the society. They don't want to communicate with anyone. They want to be in their own world. So this is how trauma can affect our behavior. So we've looked into how trauma can affect our brain, our physical well-being, our emotions, and now we've seen how trauma can affect our behavior. So let's talk about coping strategies. There are so many coping strategies that can help us to overcome traumatic experiences. The first step, which we always recommend, is that always acknowledge that you need support. So the first step to healing is acknowledge the fact that you've experienced a traumatic experience and you're ready to address the trauma. It's not going to be easy. I'm not going to come here and tell you it's all easy. Sometimes it might be difficult for us to accept the fact that we've experienced a traumatic event. So the first step is to acknowledge the fact that you need help. And seeking help is not a sign of weakness. I've seen people tell me that the reason why they don't want to tell people about what they are going through, is because they don't want to seem as being weak. But the truth is that when you seek help, it does not mean that you're weak. It actually means that you're willing to take a bold step to address what it is that you are going through and get all the support you need. So don't be too hard on yourself. You're not the cause of the trauma. You're not the reason why you've experienced that trauma. So if there's an opportunity for you to heal up, please um explore those opportunities. Another one is to reach out for help. Sometimes you might want to find at least a trusted friend. We always need people in our corner. It could be a family member, and sometimes you might need more professional support, like the help of a mental health professional who is trained to guide you and support you on how to overcome those traumatic leftover pain and how to deal with it. And thankfully, in recent times, we've seen a lot of changes. How we've seen more awareness. We have so many NGOs who are now trying to provide therapy options to people. Some even offer free therapy sessions. You can make the best use of those opportunities as well to get all the help you need. The summary is that don't keep it to yourself, because when we keep it to ourselves over time, it becomes overwhelming. So don't get to that stage where you can't, where you just break down. So if now that you have the opportunity to get help, please try to seek the help. These are some other examples of some coping strategies that we can make use of. You can deep breathing exercises. Yes, exercise has been found to be very helpful to boost our mental health and well-being. So you can engage in exercise, journaling, painting. Someone mentioned at the beginning, we shared our experiences on how we are able to deal with stressful events. So journaling can help, painting, maintaining a unhealthy lifestyle like our diet, sleeping well, have a good routine. All of these, I know that sometimes this may seem, oh, this is just simple thing. Why do I have to exercise? Why do I have to eat well? They seem very simple, but trust me, they go a long way in making an huge impact and helping us to overcome mental health problems that we face, and taking time to rest as well. Also practice positive self-talk. You don't have to criticize yourself over and over again. You've been through a lot already. So it's unfair when you are now constantly criticizing yourself for for experiencing a traumatic event. So try to stay calm with yourself, show love with yourself, and hopefully you're going to get through all of that. And always remember that, like I said, is acknowledge the fact that you need help. It's not a sign of weakness. And another thing I can help you is to develop healthy coping mechanisms, because we have what we call the bad and the or negative coping mechanisms, and then we also have healthy ones as well. Substance abuse is a coping mechanism, but is unhealthy. So other coping mechanisms are what I just listed now. So these are ones that can help us to manage the symptoms and improve our overall well-being. And also, if you have people around you who are willing to support you, please don't push them away. We have some friends or family members who genuinely care about us and who are willing to listen to us. Don't just push them away and say, no, well, how is that going to help? Make the best use of all the supports available to you. So, and always remember, lastly, that you are not alone. Many people have experienced trauma in their lives, and so it is more common that we often realize. So what we're going to do now, before I end this conversation, is that we're going to have an anonymous poll again. I'll share the link. And if you know someone that has, so the question is, have you or someone you know experienced trauma? You know, many times we say it a lot that you're not alone. People will say it's a lie. I'm the only person experiencing this. So now if there's someone in the room right now who is feeling that way, we are going to demonstrate to that person that you're not alone, and there are a lot of people who have experienced trauma in the past. So I'll put the link in the chat now, and then we'll display our responses. In just a minute. Okay, so the link is in the chat now. Okay, so the link is in the chat. Let me open it. The same way we did the first one earlier, but this time around, it's just a yes or no answer. If you've known someone who has experienced trauma in the past. So let's see our responses. So the question, you may choose more than one option or just two options. So let's see. Okay, so far we have about 9, 10, yes, past 11. Okay, 9, 1. Okay. So in the room so far, from what I can see in our responses, about 12 of us have experienced trauma personally, and about 9 know have a friend, maybe a family member who have experienced. So I'm not just saying it because I want us to just feel better, but I'm just letting you know that if you're in there, you're listening to me right now, and you've experienced a traumatic events, know that you're not alone. You can take a screenshot of this picture to always remind yourself that you're not alone, and there are people who have also experienced trauma. The number is increasing. I can see that we have 14 persons in the room who have experienced trauma personally, and there are 10 of us who have a friend or a family member who have experienced trauma. So thank you everyone for your time, for your patience, and now please, you feel free to bombard me with your questions. Thank you.
Wow, wow, wow. Thank you so much. That was a whole lot. That was a whole lot. Can we all please take some time to appreciate her in the chat box? Thank you so much. Thank you for the amazing session. Let's see. Keep it coming. Keep it coming. This has really been insightful. I mean, from the case study, saying, you know, a life picture of how trauma can actually impact our everyday lives. Using that example really helps to break it down and simplify it for everyone. And I really, really like that. So for the Q&A, because we have another speaker on the call and want to make sure that we get everything out first, we'll take questions and answers after the second speaker has gone through his own session as well. So please stay on the call with us. There's still going to be opportunity for questions and answers, but we want to make sure that the second speaker is also able to address, you know, some of the things that may even be on your mind as well. And probably during the course of his own session, you might also get answers to some of the questions that you have on your mind. But this has really been insightful. Thank you so much, Bukola, once again. We are super amazing. We have learned so much from just the tiny bits that you have, you know, stayed with us. Personally, I mean, getting to see how the parts of our brain is even involved, you know, in the traumatic experiences that we face. It's also very, very enlightening. Please feel free to drop in one or two things that you learned in the chat box. Let's see what are the things that you learned from Bukola's session. I have learned a lot. I can see that trauma can have both immediate and long-term effects now on our mental health. I can also see that there are coping strategies, so many coping strategies, and there are some that are healthy and there are some that are also unhealthy. And a lot of the times people tend to, resort to unhealthy coping mechanisms, which, makes the problem even worse. But getting to see that, oh, there are so many healthy ways to cope with trauma by leaning into your support systems, by looking out for yourself, by practicing self-care, meditation, exercising, and all of those things. They really go a long way. Thank you so much. Guys, let's see your comments. Let's see one or two things that you have learned. Someone says, thank you, Bukola. This is so mind-blowing. Thank you. We are glad that you have learned a lot. Thank you so much. Thank you. Okay, let's keep it coming. Let's keep it coming. Let's have more comments. One or two things that you have learned from Bukola's session. As our second speaker, we'll be getting ready. Oye Dotson says, learn to always speak up and that I am not alone. Absolutely. You are never alone. You are never alone. I mean, the poll is an indication that you are never alone. I mean, right here on this call, you have people that, also have been through situations that you have been through as well. Precious says, I have learned I'm not alone. Exactly. Thank you so much for sharing. Thank you so much. Lua Banker says, I learned that accepting that you need help is the first step to getting over trauma. Exactly. Amazing. Thank you for sharing what you have learned. Thank you so much for sharing that. So without wasting any more time, we are going to go straight and bring our second speaker in. Remember that I mentioned at the beginning of this call that we wanted a very inclusive conversation, which is why we decided to bring in two mental health professionals, somebody who can approach the topic from a more Gen Z perspective, addressing it more to the younger generation, and then somebody else who is much older who can also share his own expertise and light, on the topic and help us to fully have a wholesome conversation. So we are going to be introducing him. He's already on this call and we are excited and looking forward to his session as well. Jennifer says, I've never really known how trauma rewires the brain. Thank you, Bukola, for that information. You're absolutely welcome, Jennifer. Thank you so much for joining us. So right about now, I'm going to go ahead, bring in our next speaker, who is going to also shed more light on the topic, understanding trauma. What is it and how does it affect you? Going to go ahead and read his bio now, after which he's going to take over the conversation. So meet our speaker, Tunji Babajide. With over 20 years of experience as a pioneering mental health advocate and relationship therapist, Tunji has transformed the lives of countless individuals, families, and communities, specializing in working with upwardly mobile individuals. Tunji utilizes a data-driven approach that integrates coaching, counseling, and psychological insights to address both life, mental health, and relationship goals. Tunji's method is anchored in an integrative coaching model, offering clients a holistic helicopter view of their emotional, mental, and relational well-being. This bird's eye perspective allows Tunji to see beyond surface issues, delving into root causes and delivering comprehensive solutions tailored to individual needs. By merging evidence-based therapy techniques with intuitive coaching strategies, Tunji helps clients unlock their potential, heal from trauma, cultivate emotional intelligence, and build healthy, lasting relationships. Ladies and gentlemen, please in the chat box, help us welcome our second speaker, Dr. Tunji Babajide. Thank you so much, Dr. Tunji, for joining us.
Thank you so very much. Okay. Can you hear me now? Can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can hear you loud and clear.
Okay. Thank you so very much for having me. I want to thank the organizers of this event because for me, I found out that there are certain conversations that should not be at the back burner especially in Nigeria, Africa, that is still in the back burner. In the last 5 years, there's been quite some emerging meetings that I've attempted to address this. So every time I find a forum where someone or a group of people have come together to address the issues of mental health, it's always very heartwarming for me. So I want to thank everyone. Thank you for being an amazing host, and thank you for being on my neck to get things done. Bolu, thank you. Also to the CEO who is behind the scene, Precious, thank you for steering this up again. Sometimes it takes years to know the impact that we have made in the life of people. Sometimes at the airport, sometimes in the mall, someone walks up to me and say, "Oh, I was at a seminar where you spoke." And from that moment, boom, I got a better understanding of what issues I was dealing with. One thing I found, particularly because I know there's a lot of, I presume that there's a lot of Nigerians or Africans on this call. One of the things I've found with issues with the African descent is the fact that many people don't even understand their problem. And when people don't understand their problem, that already is a problem on its own. And I always like to say that diagnosis will precede prescription. So when someone thinks that his problem is ABC, obviously he will get prescription intervention for ABC. However, most people, their problem is XYZ, and that very parallel approach is oftentimes why people hide behind the finger. Anyway, I welcome you so dearly. And please, can we put our hands together again for the first speaker? She did an amazing job. I mean, my slogan for speaking is keeping it short and simple. She did an amazing job, where she kept it very, very short and simple. All right, to jump into my conversation today, in this webinar, I want you to know that we're deep diving into, the silent transformation, that shape our well-being. So this is not just for me a conversation. This is for me an interaction that will help you, to understand why certain things happen to you better. I know that there are many people here who perhaps had listened to something about mental health, but I always say to people that there is a difference between knowledge and understanding. I used to have a protege who scored, he scored A in CRK, Christian Religious Knowledge, but just doesn't know who Jesus is. So it's one thing to, score well in his subject. It's another thing to understand it. So I will attempt for you to, write on what, the former speaker has said, just to re-echo some of the things she has said, to help you recognize the unseen patterns that, may be sabotaging your mental peace. That's what I call the mental peace. I would also attempt to maybe share with you a few powerful tools, that will help you build emotional resilience and will help you cope with life challenges. In a way, we would also dive deeper to cultivate deeper, healthier relationship with ourselves and with others. I was in a session earlier today, and a particular lady said to me, he said, "Coach, please, I have a challenge trusting people." I said, well, the issue with trust is not with other people first. The issue with trust is first trusting yourself. So for you to be able to trust others, you have to first be able to re-trust yourself, if there's any word like that. So this is not just a conversation, it's a journey. It's a journey into understanding. It's a journey into healing. It's a journey into thriving. I'm hoping that by the end of our time together, you will have, taken with you a renewed perspective, and also take with you actionable insights, usable thoughts, so you can take control of your mental health at the end of it all. I often always like to say that mental health is not a destination, but it's a process. It's about how you thrive. It's about how you drive, and it's about where you are going. It's not about where you are. And also, I always like to say that healing isn't just a destination. Also, healing, it doesn't just mean that the damage never existed. All right, it means the damage no longer controls your life. All right, I want to say that again. So typically in Africa, an average person has gone through one traumatic event or something that happened that had probably, just like the former speaker said, caused either a short-term impact or a long-term impact on you. So most time I see people just want to approach mental health issue as, okay, now I have mental. No, there's nobody that has mental health. It's a continuous. So like I said earlier, healing doesn't just mean the damage never existed. It means that damage does not control or doesn't have control over your life again. Also, I like to say that your mental health is worth fighting for. So whatever it is that is not serving your mental health, you need to take a second look at it. All right? How do I define trauma? So for me, I like to say that trauma is the emotional, the psychological response to distress, okay, or disturbing events. So trauma is the emotional and psychological response to distress or disturbing events. And the events range from not even having a healthy relationship with your mom or your dad to maybe you lost your sister early, you lost your mom at a tender age. So trauma also is not just what happens to you, it's how you have experienced and processed it. Okay, quickly, I won't flog that for too long. There are different types of trauma for the people on this call. It would be just to mention it. So there is what I call acute trauma. That's a single distressing event, maybe an accident, a job loss, someone broke your heart, someone promised you marriage, got married to someone else. So that's acute trauma. There's also what we call the chronic trauma. That's a prolonged exposure to stressors, like working with a toxic boss, working in a toxic environment, when you're in an abusive relationship, um, you know, so that's chronic trauma. There's also what we call complex trauma. In other words, there's multiple repeated traumatic experiences. For example, childhood neglect. It can be an example of complex trauma. And many people don't understand that when there's childhood neglect, it has an impact on their, sense of safety, on their love, the basic human needs, you know. So I'm going to mention that again. There's acute trauma. That is a single distressing event, accident, job loss. There's chronic trauma. That talks about exposure to stressors like toxic bosses, toxic workplaces, abusive relationships, parents with, maybe an environment of dysfunctionality. Then there's also complex trauma, repeated traumatic experiences. One of the first clients I had early this year was a lady who had been raped multiple times. That's an example of complex trauma. All right. Quickly, also, it will be good to let you know, how does trauma affect us? So when we've gone through traumatic, whether it's complex, chronic, or acute, we oftentimes know the effect of trauma first on our mind. So we start to struggle with anxiety, overthinking, burnout. If I want little signs, so I'm going to mention a few things that will help you. When you find someone who exaggerates their pain, it's a sign of trauma. For example, now maybe your friend was coming to visit you, and they were in a bus that a bike hit from behind. No impact, nothing really happened. By the time he gets to your house, he say, you don't even know what happened today. God saved me, oh. Trailer jam our bus. I'm like, it takes someone who was there to say, it was just a bike that hit the back of the bus you were in. All right. So when you see people who amplify, who exaggerate their pain, you know. Then some other people, they feel stuck despite career or personal achievement. They still have a feeling that they're stuck. That's what happens to the mind. For the body, people who are either experiencing acute, chronic, or complex trauma, they sometimes encounter fatigue, headaches, unexplainable pain. Some of them have issues with sleeping. They have changes in appetite. And when I say appetite, it's not only for food. Appetite for the opposite sex, appetite for different things. Also, trauma and relationship. So not all the time, but there are times when people have difficulty in trusting others or difficulty in setting boundaries, Then how does trauma affect our relationship? When people overreact to minor conflicts, it will also be a sign that they are struggling with trauma. Let's also look quickly about into the science behind trauma. Now, what happens usually when someone has either gone through acute complex or the three-can trauma, is that trauma activates the flight or the freeze response. All right. Now, the flight or the freeze response leading to chronic stress. Now, the brain's amygdala, the other speaker spoke about the brain also, the alarm system. So the amygdala is the alarm system. It becomes overreactive, all right? While the prefrontal cortex, the rational thinking part of the brain, is less now effective. And I'm going to go over that again. So when someone has gone through a traumatic incident, the brain's amygdala, which is the alarm system, all right, becomes overreactive. So while the prefrontal cortex, which is the rational thinking, is less effective, okay? So when there is unresolved trauma, it's now stored in the body. It now begins to create physical and emotional symptoms. Now, it would also help the people on this call to know what are the signs, you may be carrying trauma. What are the signs that you haven't healed from the trauma that happened to you during your childhood? Or, there's a way we talk out of there's a way we talk our way out of our realities, because I found out that many people just don't like to admit that they've had traumatic incidences, So what are the signs that you may be carrying trauma? Sometimes frequent feelings of being overwhelmed. Sometimes when you find people who just want to numb, conversations that perhaps will trigger their, making them feel a bit uncomfortable. Some other people, so it's not a one size fits all. Some people, some of the things I've said will just be one to apply to them. Some of them will be three out of what I've said. So I'm just broadening the conversation in a way that everyone fits into the conversation. So I mentioned frequent feelings of being overwhelmed, numbness. Some people have difficulty focusing on making decisions, avoiding people, places, or activities that remind them of a past event. I don't have time to share. Maybe I should just share this quickly. I used to have a client many years ago. In fact, the first child now is about 7 years. Just to stories buttress points. So permit me to share the story, with their consent. This particular couple, they just, signed up and wanted me to do there was marital distress. So they signed up for a marital distress product and we started the sessions. And one of the high points for the husband was the fact that the wife just doesn't enjoy sex. So by the time we started digging deep, asking them open-ended questions, hearing what they were saying and what they weren't saying, I just got a light bulb moment in one of the sessions. So the lady said, I was raped serially when I was young. I said, oh, so we dig down and we found out which one was the most significant out of everything. He said, there's a particular one. I said, can you describe the person? You said, oh, the person, all she can remember was the guy was wearing a red boxers. Oh, okay. All right. Then I remember that the husband had told me that he was a Man U fan. So everything around the house was white and red. The curtain, the steering of the car, the throw pillows. And for those of you who understand the power of colors, all I needed to do was, okay, can we do an experiment? And they were comfortable enough. So we got to a point where part of the actions from a session was to do a makeover of their house. Can we do away with anything that's white and red? Boom. They did away with white and red curtains. And for the first time in their 3 or 4 years of marriage, she enjoyed sex very well. You know what has happened? The brain stores up incidences and files it up in a way that's looking for what we call confirmation bias. So for her, that red was a trigger. That's why I said when activities remind you of a past event, you know, the next morning they started calling me very early. They're like, coach, what was the magic? I said, the psychology of colors. The color was it made a significant impact on her mind that anything white and red, you know. And she also reminded me that when her dad passed and they were picking Ashwebi, she just kept saying to everyone, I don't want any Ankara that has red in it. I don't want any Ankara that has red in it. Now, that's how powerful incidents in our life could be if we don't deal with them, you know. So some of you don't like certain colors and you don't even know why, but because it might not always be everyone that is red, but I'm just using that as an example. Then when people constantly strive for perfection or approval to feel safe, you know, so when you find people pleasing, when you find people constantly striving for perfection, if things are not perfect, they won't step into it. It's got flavors of not being healed from trauma. Having said that, I came up with an acronym. Before I go into the simple steps to understand trauma, I probably just want to share. So I came up with an acronym to just help you understand it. If you're writing, just write ECHO, ECHO, ECHO. All right. E stands for events. All right. So, like I mentioned in my definition, remember I've been mentioning past events. So when there is an event that has distorted thinking, that had caused, you know, either short-term impact or long-term impact, then C talks about the context by which that person had perceived the event. Okay? And then H talks about, there's what we call homeostatic balance. All right? Then the O talks about the outcomes. ECHO, event, context, homeostatic balance, and the outcome from the event. I often like to say that it's not what happened to you that is the problem. It's your interpretation of what happened to you that is the problem. All right? Because I've seen twins lived in the same house, had a very abusive father. One turned out well, the other turned out badly. And that also speaks of our resilience. So there can be two people involved in the same accident. One could turn out and just feel like, oh, nothing happened, sleep and snore the same night that accident happened. Another person in that same car could come out of that accident saying he's got a nightmare. All right. And how we build our resilience is also a function of the kind of parenting style, you know, because there's what we call co-regulation. For the primary caregivers, who I call the parents or aunties and uncles, we owe children the responsibility to help them understand how to regulate their emotions. All right. So whatever they find as a culture in the house will be their default way by which they regulate their emotions. All right. So sometimes love, you know, safety, those three those three primary needs of every human being: love, safety. There is one of my favorite sessions in my therapy session is overcoming overcoming childhood trauma. The name of the document of my head now, I'll remember. You know, digging back into the past and helping them understand why they act the way they act and the things that they're doing and all of that. So when we talk about the homeostatic balance, it's about how our nervous system changes our beliefs, how our nervous system changes our behavior, how our nervous system help us develop behavior to cope, or that we develop as a response to the things that has happened to us. Quickly, 6 simple steps to understand trauma. Number 1, you need to acknowledge it. If you cannot name an emotion, you can't tame it. So understand that trauma is not a weakness or a failure. It's a human response. I always like to emphasize that. All right. So acknowledge it, that at some point of my life, I lost my dad, or I lost my brother, I lost my sister, and that event was traumatic. Unfortunately, has caused a long-term effect on me. All right. So if you can't name it, you can't tame it. Yeah. I'd like to share stories. So I have been involved in conflict resolution, and resolving conflict for 2 people. And I'm not sure whether anyone here can testify to this, or you've been there before. So you are saying, okay, please, Ayo, please don't be upset again. Then she starts shouting, I'm not upset, oh, I'm not upset. I'm not upset. People should not misunderstand me. I'm not upset. And she's raising her voice and she's telling you she's not upset. Everything about her connotes that she's upset, but she's in denial. Guess what will happen? If one of our values, because the reason why we're hurt, we're upset, is because our values are either validated or violated. When our values are validated, we're happy. When our values are violated, we're hurt, we're sad, and all of that. So your emotion is a pendulum between the validation of your values and the violation of your values. So on that particular incident, if that incident happened again and one of our triggers are, switched on again, she would respond the same way she did the last time, because she was living in denial. All right. So when people live in denial, they often be in I call it a loop, that emotional loop. They will just respond to the same thing the same way, because they have not been able to name the emotion so they can tame it. Number 2, recognize your triggers. Identify situation, people, environment that bring discomfort or distress. I've had another client also who perfume is a trigger. They had an armed robbery attack, and the armed robber was wearing a particular perfume. The armed robber unfortunately molested her, sexually. So that left an impression on her psyche. So when she smells a particular kind of perfume, it's a trigger for her. Because you see, the just like the former speaker said, trauma affects the 5 senses in different ways. Our sense of touch, feel, see, the 5 senses. So for her, for that event, it was her smell. But when she got engaged, she kept saying to her boyfriend, please don't use this very strong perfume because it chokes me. It might not really be the choking. It might be just the fact that that incident registered, very discomforting and distress feeling with her. Number 3, you need to listen to your body. Notice physical cues like tension, rapid heartbeat, shallow breathing. Listen to your body. You like I said, I hope that this session would help people gain awareness such that you will know exactly what the issues are. One of the tools I will leave with us is what we call, so when we haven't been able to, I've seen people ask about where do we get free sessions and all of that, but there are certain tools I'm going to share with us. So you can get relief from trauma by what we call practicing the grounding. There's what we call the grounding technique. And if you're writing this, will help you. Okay? The grounding technique is that ability for you to deep breathe, inhale for 4 seconds, hold it for 4 seconds, exhale it for 4 seconds. Okay? Deep breathing method. So maybe something triggered your memory again, and it looks like you got into that panic attack, or your heart is beating, or you just notice that you are not emotionally comfortable. That deep breathing exercise will help you. Then there's also what we call the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 method. So you would focus 5 things you see. So as I'm seated here and I can see a pillow, I can see winter jacket, I can see a box, I can see a dustpan, I can see a towel. Focus on 5 things, okay? 5 things you see, 4 things that you feel. So what can you feel? I can feel the surface of this table. I can feel my clothes. All right. 3 things you hear, 2 things you smell, and 1 thing you can taste. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 method. Okay. Focus on 5 things you see, wherever you're seated now. All right. 4 things you feel. Do you feel angry? Do you feel happy? Do you feel, Then 3 things you hear. All right. 2 things you smell. I can smell my body perfume. I can smell someone is trying to blend pepper in the kitchen. 1 thing you can taste. All right. Now, those are techniques that can help you get relief. Then also, it's good for you to build a support system. The colleague that spoke before me mentioned that, talking to a trusted friend, family member, talking to a therapist, joining a group community, they will help. Then, of course, seeking help from a therapist, using CBT. Then also, it will not be out of place for me to mention, steps to long-term healing. One of it is prioritize your self-care. Schedule time for hobbies, relaxation, physical activity, especially when, you know what, comfort has the other side. The more comfortable you are, the more you begin to live a sedentary lifestyle. While you're sitting in your car, you're sitting, and sitting has become the next cancer because many people are not just doing physical activities again. So when you find out that you're not just in that emotional state, research has found out that, walking helps out, gives you a clear perspective to your world, help you. There's what we call, which I'll also make a point, make sure you take a dose of dose. Doctors will tell you take 3 tablets every day. I always like to say that take a dose of dose. The dose is an acronym for dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, and endorphin. So every day, take a dose of those, do a workout, hug someone, okay? Shake hands, spend time with loved ones. They are called the feel-good hormone. So set a timetable to, have a flavor of the dose, because they will help your mental health, all right? Then also, it's important for you to learn to set healthy boundaries. Learning to say no without guilt. It's going to help you a great deal, especially when you find out that the person you are around is not, what they say do is not promoting your mental health. I hear someone say, okay, what if I'm married to someone who does not promote mental health? In your case, you need to see Precious so you can sign up for a session. You need, real good help, Then also it's good for you to practice journaling. Journaling has been a powerful tool, that helps you process emotions safely. Journaling will help you process emotion very safely. You'll be shocked until you start to journal. You don't even know the patterns around your thoughts. All right. Then also, I always recommend to regularly evaluate your emotional and mental health goals. You need to set them and regulate them. Beg your pardon. So what are my mental health? The year is running to an end. Don't just start 2025, with regular goals. Set emotional and mental health goals. All right. Then also, I always like to mention, so people are asking, so why is it that you're always talking about mental health? Because I believe that freeing yourself from the past rather, allows you to step fully into your potential. Because, when you heal from, past events, when you take time to prioritize your mental health, it will help you build stronger relationship, because healing builds trust, healing builds empathy, healing builds connection. Then I also found out that people who pay attention to their mental health, or find healing from their trauma, there's enhanced productivity, there's reduced stress, which improves your focus and your decision making. I think finally it would be good to also mention that trauma does not define you. It's something you've experienced. It's not who you are. With the right tools, you can heal, you can grow, you can thrive. And I want to leave this last note that remember, seeking help is a sign of strength and not a sign of weakness. Thank you for your time. I hope this has been helpful.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tunji. This has really been impactful, very short, straight to the point, and very empowering. And I'm sure everyone on this call will definitely agree with me. Please, let's appreciate our speaker, Dr. Tunji, in the chat box. I mean, so many techniques he has shared, so many tips to help you stay grounded and, cope with trauma or traumatic experiences. Thank you so much once again, Dr. Tunji. It was such a pleasure to have you. We are grateful for all the tips that you have shared, and we trust that it is really going to be resourceful for many of us here. Personally, I've learned about the 5-4-3-2-1 technique and then the deep breathing exercise as well. And I'm definitely going to start to implement them in my day-to-day life. Thank you so much once again. Gentlemen and ladies, we trust that you have learned so much, and we want to give you the opportunity to ask questions, because our speakers are here, they are mental health professionals, and they've shared so much with us already. So it's now time to attend to your questions and answers. If you have questions for the first speaker, you can indicate, you can drop them in the chat box. And if you would also like to unmute and speak, you can raise your hand so that we can give you the opportunity to ask your questions, direct them to the speaker, and get your answers. So let's see those questions in the chat box. And if you also are comfortable speaking up as well, you can just raise your hand and we'll unmute you and allow you to speak. While we are waiting for the questions, let's take in some comments. Kansi Oludare says, I can't imagine how much we would have had to pay for what has been dished out today from both speakers. Thank you so much, sir and ma. Thank you, Mental Drive Africa. You're welcome, Oludare. And yes, we pay a lot of money for these sessions, and we are giving it out here just to, help people better take care of their mental health and know what to do as well. Charlene says, thank you so much for the much needed insight, Dr. Tunji. Thank you, you're welcome. Let's have the questions, and if you want to raise your hand as well, I'm checking to see if anybody is raising up their hands. Please feel free to raise your hand. Feel free to also drop your questions in the chat box. I know earlier we had a few questions.
So I have a quick question.
All right.
For either Dr. Tunji or so in situations where people have, we have different coping mechanisms, and I'm going to be directing it specifically at the example you gave, the lady who just saw red, whenever she was probably going to have sex with her husband or something. Would you say that would you qualify this as a healthy coping mechanism if she had already known that, because she has had a similar, red is a trigger, yeah? So would you consider it a coping mechanism if she had directed her energy at liking green instead? So in a way to avoid trigger, which is now known to her to be red, color red, would you say it's an healthy coping mechanism to direct one's or redirect one's energy into another thing similar to what the person is going through? Is my question clear enough?
Yes.
On coping mechanism.
So let me start by saying that colors have a profound psychological, emotional impact on individuals, and colors can play a significant role in processing trauma. Trauma affects the nervous system. It often causes heightened stress responses, emotional dysregulation, difficulty calming. So colors can influence emotions, mood, and even physical responses, making them a powerful tool in therapeutic practices. So yeah, even in the context of this, the change of the color is a coping mechanism for whatever has happened to her. Yeah, so white and red was the trigger. Then I can't remember. I think they changed to either white and gray or white and something. I can't remember. But colors are often associated with calmness, stability, and relaxation. Blue, green, lavender, they're colors that are often associated with calmness and relaxation. And they can help ground individuals experiencing anxiety, hyperarousal due to trauma. So for instance, soft blue tones may create a sense of safety and trust, while green can evoke feelings of renewal and balance. I mean, I did an entire course on the psychology of colors. So yeah, it's a healthy coping mechanism to find another color. Green, if I hear you clearly. I hope I answered your question. If I didn't, just help me re-emphasize it.
All right, thank you so much, Dr. Tunji. Precious, I want to believe that your question has been answered, and if not, you can indicate in the chat box if you need any more clarifications, and we'll be sure to get to that. Okay, so we have Oludare here who raised his hand to ask a question. So I'm going to give you the opportunity to unmute yourself now and ask your question. You can go ahead, Oludare.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Saz and Maz. Building on this question, Miss Precious asked now, is it possible to help such a person not find red as a trigger to such stresses? And if possible, what are those steps to overcoming that? At least not seeing red as a trigger to such stress. That's my first question. Sorry. The second question. I think you and the first speaker said something about trauma rewiring the amygdala, right? Yeah. So I wanted to ask, because I learned somewhere that something like that can be heritable through the concept of epigenetics. So I wanted to ask, in this regard, in the case of mental health and in human beings, is it heritable? Traumas that people haven't been able to heal of, can that be passed on to the next generation? That's the question. Thank you.
Okay, so I'll start with your second question. So it's difficult to give a blanket answer. For some people, some things are genetic, some people they are not. There are other questions that need to be asked before we come to a conclusion that is exactly what the issue is. That's one. Two, the same thing approach is what I'm going to give to the issue of the color. So the truth about it is that some other people, they have either been slapped. Their father used to wear white agbada and slapped them, and they're comfortable with color white. So that's why I said it's not what happened to us that matters, it's how we interpret it and the state of our emotion, the level of our resilience. So it will not be fair to isolate the question, or the isolate that situation and use it as an absolute, right? So other questions need to be asked to be able to know what the impact of the color is, how that has become either a healthy or not a healthy coping mechanism, and you'll be shocked. Perception is when we talk about coping mechanism, perception is very, very, very important. I'll share a quick story if a moderator will allow me. So one of my friends came into the country 2 years ago, and she just told them, they said, oh, they're kidnapping in Nigeria and all of that, blah, 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 blah. So they got her, and she was coming to visit very high network individuals. They got her military with guns, DSS, and she entered panic attack. Can you imagine? In Nigeria, if you go to an event and there are soldiers, there is DSS, those ones that cover their face, you feel safe. As a British or an American, if you go into an event and there's military, you are in panic attack. Same uniform, same approach, different context. They had to tell the security that was going to wait on her for the days, the ones carrying guns, not to come and come around her. They had to tell them to drop some of the people who are going to be their immediate guards to drop their weapon. So I said that to say that when I mentioned the issue of the echo, remember I said event, then context. Because what is one man's food can be another man's poison. What's a trigger for another man can be calming for the other person. All right. So in the mental health spectrum, blanket answers will not do justice. There has to be a wider range of other questions before we can say this is what is happening and this is what can be done. Okay. All right. Because of the brevity of time, I saw this question, and because I've worked with a couple of people who have been abused, I just want to just quickly answer it. I saw someone ask, how do you know you have been emotionally abused? So emotional abuse can be difficult to identify, really, because it often happens gradually, without clear physical evidence. And sometimes it involves patterns of behavior, that manipulate, belittle, isolate, or control, leading to feelings of worthlessness, confusion, self-doubt. So sometimes, don't forget I said it's never a one-size-fits-all. There has to be a lot of things put in context. But to just give you a blanket answer, sometimes when people feel undervalued or unworthy, constant criticism, or they grew up in an environment where they are put down, that will make them feel like they are never good enough. When they grow up around people with feeling that make them, there's what we call dismissal of feeling. When you say this is what I'm going through, I say, are you the only one? Or we are being told that you are too sensitive, you're overreacting. In fact, there's one that I always like to mention when I do seminars. In Nigeria, particularly in the African community, we do body shaming without looking back. If you call somebody Orobo, that's body shaming. Or you call somebody Lekpa, that's body shaming. But you see auntie says, talk by Orobo, or Muiwa Orobo. That's body shaming. All right? But so then sometimes when you find that you have a loss of confidence, in other words, you grew up in an environment where things were done to you that diminished your sense of self-worth, making you feel incapable of making decisions without validation. When people question your memory, by gaslighting you, So also, if you grow up around people who practice emotional manipulation, being subjected to guilt tripping, silent treatment, passive-aggressive behavior, there are ways to control your actions or emotions. Or maybe you are around people who always make you experience blame shifting. Then when you go around people where you fear the walking on eggshell, constantly worrying about how the other people or the person will react, and all of that. So also control and monitoring. There are many things that we sweep under the carpet that can be an indicator to emotional abuse. But I also want the other speaker to give an answer from our perspective. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tunji, for that prompt and swift response. Daria, I hope your question has been answered. And yes, we would also like to give opportunity for our first speaker, Bukola, to also touch a little on this, and also to help answer the question. There's a question from Precious here that says, how do you help a loved one get out of a depressing phase, especially in times when they do not want to seek help? So we'd love for you, Bukola, to be able to help us out with this, and also maybe touch a little more about the emotional abuse question.
Okay, so
sorry, Bukola, sorry to cut you short. Before you answer that, I also added to the question that this person has just recently had or gone through a sexual emotional trauma. And just so you can go forward with all of it, there's another question you might want to add on to that question so you can answer both together. If you could go to the very last part. Bolu, if you could go through to the last part of.
Okay, I can see here someone is
Yes,
asking, how can I heal from a serious relationship trauma?
the one before that, sorry.
And then somebody says, I was also abused multiple times, both emotionally and sexually, but I never dealt with it, but instead took care of others. So if you could address this.
Okay, thank you very much. So I will start with the question about the emotional abuse. The others, Dr. Tunji has told us a lot already regarding how to identify emotional abuse. I just want to add is that sometimes there are some signs that we often overlook that are clear signs of emotional abuse. For example, if someone is humiliating you in front of others, someone is using insultive words, languages to qualify you, someone is getting angry or threatening you to do things that you are not comfortable with, you are being coerced into doing something that you do not want to do. Those are examples of emotional abuse. And so most times in cases of, for example, if you are being bullied or someone is threatening you to trying to hurt you, or even trying to hurt something that you care about, maybe someone else that you care about, the person is trying to hurt that thing, all those are examples of emotional abuse. So it's for us to be able to be open-minded to see things for what they are, because sometimes we make excuses that no, it's just because he's angry. Because someone is angry does not mean that they have to call you all insultive names. There are other ways people can manage their anger. So these are some of the little things that can we can use to know that when we are being emotionally abused. So I will go right into the second question regarding how to help someone. Sorry, let me see if I said the question. How to help someone who has been emotionally abused. Is that the question?
So the person is asking how you
Okay.
can help.
Okay, I've seen the question. So how do you help a loved one get out of depressing phase? So it is always very difficult to see a loved one going through a mental health condition like depression. And oftentimes we feel this need to want to take away the problem. First of all, you need to know that you can't force anyone to seek help. You can't force anyone to open up to you. They have the liberty to tell you what it is they are going through or not. So what you can do is just to let them know that you're there for them. Let them know that you're willing to listen to them without judging. Because, like I said, one of the things that trauma does is that it also affects the brain. So when you are trying to pester someone to open up to you or trying to say, tell me what's going on, or let's go and seek, and the person is telling you no. Sometimes not because they don't want to talk to you, but they haven't gotten to that phase or that space where they are willing to open up. So don't try to, and don't feel bad about it. It's not about not trusting you enough. So because sometimes we also take it upon ourselves and say, maybe this person does not trust me well enough. That's why he or she is not opening up to me. It's just the way it is. So what you can do is just to be patient with them. Let them know that you're there for them whenever they are willing to open up to you and to seek help. So you can also suggest if they can go and see a professional. So what you can do yourself is to make research and see, okay, is there any opportunity available in terms of therapy? And then let them know that, okay, you would like to recommend this for them. But always know that you cannot force anyone to seek help. And which is very difficult to hear sometimes, because when you see someone going through pain, you want to help them, but they're not ready they're not ready to open up, they're not ready to listen to you yet. So be calm with them, be patient with them, and hopefully over time they'll open up to you and they'll be willing to seek help. It's very difficult to take in, but it's just the reality that you can't force anyone to seek help.
Thank you so much, Bukola, for addressing that. You can't force anyone to seek help. You just have to, try to be with them, try to support them in the best way that you can, and allow them to come to realization that they need the help, and then help them along the way. Thank you so much for clarifying that. So we have a question in the chat box, and I would really love Dr. Tunji to address this particular question. So the question says, I had a mental breakdown on Monday night, and I realized I had needed serious help because I wanted to cut myself badly to numb my pains at that particular moment. How do I know my triggers and help myself? I was also abused multiple times, both emotionally and sexually, but I never dealt with it, but instead took care of others. Dr. Tunji would really like you to address this particular question.
Sorry, I think I missed out on that. Please, can you run through the question again? Sorry.
All right, I'll take it again. So the person says, I had a mental breakdown on Monday night, and I realized I needed serious help because I wanted to cut myself badly to numb my pains at that particular moment. How do I know my triggers and help myself? And she added that I was also abused multiple times, both emotionally and sexually, but I never dealt with it, but instead took care of others.
Okay. Sai. So I really want to empathize with you. You know, and I know how painful that can be. It's really sorry to hear that you're carrying such a heavy burden. You know, and also it is incredibly brave of you to acknowledge these feelings and to share them. And this for me is an important first step towards healing. You know, when we take a moment to explore what is happening to us and how we can work together to address it. So, the first thing, you need to validate your experience. Feeling like you're reaching a breaking point is the reason why you want to cut yourself. You know, on the spectrum of people getting suicidal, we have the hopelessness state, the hopelessness, the of course sometimes people begin to have suicidal ideations and all of that, cluelessness and all of that. So feeling like you reach that breaking point, struggling with thoughts of self-harm, it doesn't make you weak. It's a sign that you are facing emotional pain and you're overwhelmed. And you don't have to go through this alone. You know, reach out to Precious, reach out to the team. I'm sure they can find a professional who can work out something for you. Then also it's important to understand the pain. Sometimes when we don't deal with emotions or past experiences, they often build up and feel like that they're taking control. So it will be good to also, in this, whoever they recommend for you, to share what might lead to those feelings of wanting to harm yourself. You know, was that a particular event? Was it a relationship break? Did someone break your heart? Were you sacked from work? Or was it that there was a series of moments that felt too much to bear? It would be good to also unpack that. So why it feels unresolved. So if you never addressed what you went through, it's possible that your mind and your body, they're still carrying the weight of that unresolved pain. And it's a weight. So emotions are chemical. That's why when you're angry, you feel heavy. You know, so trauma, stress, or suppressed emotions, they don't just disappear. They can linger until we give them the attention they need. They usually need attention. Sometimes some people don't deal with it until they get into marriage and they find out that, oh, they've got, bipolar tendencies and all of that. Okay. So you've got to find a way to deal with it. So if you leave what you are meant to do and or deal with and you take care of other people, there might also be flavors of people pleasing. There's also what we call the eldest daughter syndrome, EDS. If you are the eldest daughter, I can relate with it. So you've grown up to be over responsible for your age and you just want to be there for people, and sometimes being there for people is also a way to negotiate and to be able to say, okay, I've done this for you. What can you do back in return for me? Okay. So while you are trying to seek help, it's important for you to create a safe space, because the fact that you're sharing this now shows incredible strength. And I always like to commend people who choose to be vulnerable, because that's the only way we can together work on building a safe space where you can begin to unpack this, So just to also stretch that out, if you've ever been, you've tried talking to someone about it before or taking steps to take care of yourself during this hard time and it didn't work, please don't give up. There's still hope and there's still someone around the corner who will be able to listen and talk you through it. So if you're still experiencing thoughts of self-harm, it's essential to have a plan in place to keep yourself safe. So if you still feel, if these feelings return, please promise yourself to reach out to someone you trust, call this. I mean, I can see that there's a link that they've been sharing on the screen, because the path to healing is one, processing your emotion. Because when you decide to be healed or to get to the required solution, it's about walking through the emotions you've been holding pieces by pieces so they don't feel so overwhelming. All right. So of course, I mentioned a few coping mechanisms that can help you. Of course, also, I want to round up by saying you've been going through a lot. You know, you got to look at the situation with curiosity and not with judgment. It's time to treat yourself with kindness and understand that you deserve a better life. All right. So reach out. Precious, you can let me know who the person is. I can do 1 or 2 pro bono sessions for him or her as she finds her rhythm back to work. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tunji, for that very insightful response. Whoever you are, we hope that you can reach out to us. Dr. Tunji has agreed to do 1 or 2 pro bono sessions to help you out. So please feel free to reach out. I'm sure the links are being dropped on the group chat. You can connect with us on our social media platforms. There's another question here that says, how do you help someone who is fixated and keeps ruminating on past trauma even after seeking therapy? Because I don't know if you'd like to take this. The person is asking how you can help someone that keeps fixating on their past trauma even after therapy. Is there a way around it?
Okay, well, it's still similar to the previous question about how to help someone who's having a mental health problem. Like I said earlier, that remember that this person also is independent and can make their choices on their own. So if you notice that this person is still fixated on the traumatic experience, what you can just do is just be patient with them. I mean, I know that it's very tough when we tell people to be patient because you can't force, as much as you really want to help someone, if the person themselves are not seeing it as a problem, it's difficult for you to convince them that this is what. So what you can do is that if you were able to attend some of the sessions with the person, you can remind the person about what the person has learned. And sometimes people might be okay, let's give an example. Maybe the person was involved in a car accident and the person has gone through therapy and is still not willing to drive a car. You can't just force it on people to just go back to that response, to go back to that experience. It's a gradual process. People don't change overnight. So rather than say that, okay, go and drive a car now, what you can do is a gradual exposure. So it's step by step, and not rather than wanting them to just change overnight, because sometimes we expect the magic to happen overnight, which in reality it does not. People will still take time to understand what they've learned in therapy and begin to put into practice bit by bit. So slowly, gradually, people can be exposed back into that experience. So patience is what you need, a lot of patience and water. So so that you don't get over. So you have to be patient with the person. And you also need to understand from the person's perspective that despite the fact that they've had therapy, it's still going to take a while for them to adjust into what they've learned. People don't change overnight. So that's what I would say regarding that.
Thank you so much, Bukola. I want to believe that your question has been answered. Whoever asked the question. Is there anyone that also wants to raise their hand to ask their question? Probably you feel more comfortable talking than just chatting in the box. You can raise your hand and we'll give you the opportunity as well. I think we have room for 1 or 2 more questions before we wrap up tonight. Dr. Tunji, can we just touch a little on this question? I know that this webinar is actually one of a series we are still going to be having, because trauma is a whole lot of conversation, it's a whole lot. And the way we decided to do it, we decided to break it down to address specific aspects about trauma so that we can have a wholesome conversation and learning experience. So at some point, our next session is going to be about, childhood trauma and how it impacts adulthood. And then eventually we are also going to be looking at emotional trauma as well. But I just want you to talk a little on this, Dr. Tunji, because I know you are also a relationship coach. The person is asking, how can I heal from a serious relationship trauma? You could just address it a little, please. Thank you. Hello, Dr. Tunji. Did you get that?
All right. Healing from serious relationship trauma is a deeply personal and transformative process. So just like the other speaker said, it takes time, it takes self-compassion, and it takes intentional effort, because relationship traumas whether caused by betrayal, emotional abuse, neglect, or devastating breakup, they often leave lasting emotional scars. The challenge with emotional scars is that you don't see them. You know, if I come to you now and say, "Oh, Bukola, can you see my hand? Someone cut me with a knife." I will that the fact that you can see it will arouse empathy. You say, "Oh, who did this?" and all of that. But the challenge with emotional scars is that they're not seen. So not many people can even empathize enough for you to be able to feel you've been heard. So a few things to do: validate the trauma, validate your pain, accept that what you went through was real and impactful. I mean, it's okay to feel hurt. It's okay to be angry. It's okay to be confused. I always say this: emotions you cannot name, you will not be able to tame. Suppressing your emotions, it only delays the healing process. And I've seen many people use suppression as a coping mechanism. I mean, that's a symposium discussion we'll probably discuss some other time. Then also, it's good to reflect on the relationship and the pinpoint. You know, what caused the trauma? Was it betrayal? Was it abuse? Was it neglect? Because clarity helps you understand and process your experience. You know, then one thing most people don't do it. What was my own role in what has happened? You know, I always say to people that trauma does not help it doesn't help people who are not willing to know what their role was. You know, I had a session with a lady recently and we're talking back and forth, and we got to a point where she hit the light bulb moment and she said, "Oh, I don't think there was something wrong with the guy who broke my heart. I think there was something wrong with my lens. I wasn't seeing clearly." That was a light bulb moment for me. So sometimes when people feel heartbroken from a relationship, by the time they begin to gain awareness, they even found out that the state of their mind is not clear enough to even make a right choice. All right. So then also I recommend that you seek support. A relationship therapist can help you process the trauma, understand the patterns, and develop tools for recovery. Everybody has a relationship pattern. If you check the people you have dated, you'll find out that they're just a pattern. You know, you attract a kind of set of people. All right. Then it's good to, talk to someone you trust. Then I always like to mention journaling. Write about your experience to give your feelings an outlet. So writing helps you give your feeling an outlet and make sense of them. The way you are now, your brain is so clumsy and clustered. But journaling will help you, give your feelings an outlet. Then sometimes I would so recommend that people should write a letter to themselves or write a letter to their ex. You don't need to post it, but it will be an outlet, for the feelings that you have bottled up. Then you can use music, you can use art, creative expression to process emotions non-verbally. Then also, I always say this: once you're broken up, don't go and be stalking on your ex. So we took a picture with somebody on Instagram now. Yeah, was I not fine? The guy is even shorter than you are going to accusing yourself more in arm. All right. I always say this once. What if it was there's nothing called a clean breakup, but at least you guys have a conversation before the breakup. Just tell him, "I'm not doing this out of hurt." But you need to set boundaries. Boundaries is not a suggestion, it's an instruction that I don't want to talk to you. So it's not childish at some times to block your ex from reaching you, because the person who hurt you cannot be present around when you want to take your healing. So distance from the source of your pain will create physical and emotional space where, because the person who caused the trauma cannot be the person who will give you the space to heal. All right. So please set the boundaries, reclaim your power back by setting clear limits in the relationship. Then another thing that's on your fingertip before you seek professional help is it's important for you to challenge negative beliefs. So I always say this: when things happen to you, please, your default mode is to have a disempowering meaning to what has happened. Challenging negative beliefs is to give an empowering meaning to what has happened to you. So this is an example. The guy broke your heart. Maybe you paid the school fees when you were in school. You finish now. He says he's not going to marry you, or you dated for 5 years. No matter how devastating it is, the default for an average person is, Kunle has spoiled my life. I don't even know where I can go from here. Oh, Kunle had betrayed me. Kunle. Why don't you switch the narrative to, well, myself and Kunle have broken up. I think I've identified my faults and I am willing to learn so I can better be in a relationship that will be helpful to my mental health. That's an empowering perspective. And that's your choice. Nobody can do that for you. So switch your interpretation of the event from a disempowering perspective to an empowering perspective. All right? Things like when I say challenge your negative belief, because you see, trauma distorts your perception of yourself and your relationship. I need you to write that down. Trauma, it distorts your perception of yourself and your relationship, which now will lead to thoughts like, I am unworthy of love, or I can't trust anybody again. Men has come. All right? Then it's also important for you to identify negative thoughts. Notice recurring harmful beliefs. Maybe I'm not good enough. So when I talk about reframing your narrative, replace them with affirmations like, I deserve love and respect, or not all relationships are the same, than saying, oh, I don't deserve love. No, it's an opportunity for you to rediscover yourself. So it's good that it has happened. Please look at the situation with curiosity, not with judgment. Practice self-compassion. Be kind to yourself as you navigate the healing process. Forgive yourself, for any perceived mistakes or weaknesses in your relationship. Then you need to learn and grow. It's good to reflect on the lessons, the experience this has taught you about relationship, and use this insight to approach future relationship with clarity and with confidence. All right. I think those steps will help you. Then maybe on a final note, healing from relationship trauma isn't about erasing the past. No. It's not about indulging the person who hurt you. It's about reclaiming your power, rediscovering your worth, building a future where love and connection, makes you feel safe and fulfilling, because you are resilient, and with the right tools and support, I believe you can move forward and stronger than ever. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much. I mean, that was a whole lot, and I hope that the person that asked the question has gotten some clarity on that. So you're absolutely welcome. You're absolutely welcome. We are about wrapping up right now. In about 2 to 3 minutes, we'll be done. This has really been an amazing conversation. We want to specifically thank our speakers, Bukola Oyesomi and Dr. Tunji Babajide, for joining us tonight on the conversation. Thank you for sharing your insights with us. And I know that everyone on this call has learned one thing or the other, even more than one thing, sir, because it has really been enlightening. So can we all please appreciate our speakers in the chat box, and please feel free to follow our social media pages. You can follow our speakers on pages as well. Bukola is on Instagram at Moments with Bukola, and she's a mental health advocate, and she uses her platform to share empowering content that revolve around mental health. Dr. Tunji is also a therapist. You can find him on social media. You can follow him as well to learn more about some of his programs, some of his events, and also be a part of it as well. And you can also find us on Instagram at Mental Drive Africa, on LinkedIn at Mental Drive Africa. We are also on TikTok at Mental Drive Africa, and on Hex at MD_Africa_. Thank you so much. This has been enlightening. Like we mentioned earlier, that this particular series is one of 3 series, because we are trying to delve fully into trauma, dissect the topic completely. So tonight's session is like a foundation, which is why we tagged it Understanding Trauma. It's just to scratch the surface, see what trauma is all about and how it impacts our everyday lives. And the next session we are going to be having in a couple of weeks will be on the impact of childhood trauma on adult mental health, where we'll also be bringing in mental health professionals to also buttress on that particular topic. And then eventually we'll wrap it up with dealing with emotional trauma, which is where we are going to be talking about emotions, relationships, and every other thing in between. So you cannot afford to miss all of these sessions. I mean, you can see how power-packed today's session was. So just imagine, all of the other things that we have planned out for you. So we'll be looking forward to having you in the remaining sessions. Before we go, I would like to give opportunity for the driving force behind Mental Drive Africa to say a few things and also appreciate us. So can we please, in the chat box, appreciate the founder of Mental Drive Africa, Precious Adeyinka Salami.
Hi everyone. Okay, thank you, Bulu. Thank you very much. My name is Precious, like she said, and I've been engaging with a couple of people in the chat, yeah, in the chat box, through the session. And just as Bolu has rightly said, we really do appreciate everyone that's taking their time out to be a part of this. I think we started out with about 30 participants and we're down to 18. So we hope that you've had an exciting time, an insightful time tonight. So we do hope that the next session you'll be able to reach out to more people, reach out to your friends, reach out to just you can just do the basic of even posting on your status, and reposting on LinkedIn, retweeting on X. It goes a long way. You never might know who would need this. And just like Dr. Tunji said earlier, impact is more of a ripple effect thing. It takes one drop in the ocean for it to be felt all around, all over. So thank you so much, everyone. Thank you to the speakers for honoring our invitation. In fact, we do not take it for granted. We do not take it for granted. Let me just put it at that. Thank you so much, everyone. We look forward to you being continuous part of this impact that we've set out on, and we do not take it for granted. So do have a wonderful evening, everyone. Till when next? Kindly stay in touch. Kindly stay connected. It's important you stay connected. As for every other person that has promised to get in touch for a therapy session or for a counseling session, please do not forget to reach out to us. We're also going to connect with you as much as we can. Thank you once again, Dr. Tunji. Thank you so much, Bukola. I've been your fan for years. Yeah, since 2021. I've been following. So it's finally great to be in a room where we get to hear you speak and dish out wisdom. Dr. Tunji has been a driving force for years. So we really appreciate it, sir. Thank you so much. Do have a wonderful evening, everyone. Bye.
Bye, everyone. Thank you, and have a lovely night.
Thank you.
Bye bye. Good night.